The city was quiet that night, too quiet. Street lights flickered like dying stars, and the air smelled of smoke and fear. People locked their doors early. They had heard rumors, whispers of something dark rising, something no one was ready for. In a small apartment on the edge of the city, a young boy named Ethan sat by the window, looking out at the empty streets. He was only 16, but his eyes carried the weight of someone much older. His hands were trembling slightly as he held an old book close to his chest, the only thing he had left from his father. His father used to say, "When the world turns against you, find strength in the quiet." But that night, there was no quiet. There was thunder. Not from the sky, from far away, deep inside the city. Boom. A single explosion. Then another. The glass in Ethan's window shook. He froze. For a moment, he thought it was just another firework, maybe a car backfiring. But then came the sound that no one ever forgets, the scream of 100 people running at once. Ethan stood up quickly and looked out again. A building in the distance was burning. Flames climbed high into the black sky, painting everything red. The war had begun. Down the hall, someone was shouting, "Pack your things. We have to go." It was Mrs. Green, the old librarian who lived in the same building. Her voice was filled with panic. She had always been kind to Ethan, giving him leftover food, books, and gentle advice. But tonight, her face was pale with fear. "Ethan, hurry," she cried. "The soldiers are coming this way." "Soldiers?" Ethan asked, confused. "Why? What's happening?" "There's fighting in the city center," she said, grabbing his arm. "They said the army lost control. It's chaos out there." He looked at her trembling hands and nodded. He quickly grabbed his small bag, a few clothes, a bottle of water, and the old book. That was all he had. As they stepped into the hallway, the sound of distant gunfire echoed through the walls. People were running down the stairs, some carrying children, some crying, some completely silent, their faces empty, as if their souls had already left. Outside, the streets were covered with broken glass and smoke. The smell of burning rubber filled the air. Sirens wailed from every direction. Ethan held Mrs. Green's hand tightly as they ran toward the old library across the square. The library had always been Ethan's safe place. It was where he studied, dreamed, and hid from the world. But tonight, it looked different, dark and cold, its windows shattered. They rushed inside. Dust fell from the ceiling with every distant explosion. Books lay scattered on the floor, pages torn and burned. Mrs. Green closed the door behind them and whispered, "We'll stay here until it's over." Ethan looked around. The once warm and peaceful place now looked like a battlefield of forgotten words. Still, it was better than the streets. They found a corner near the history section, Ethan's favorite. He spread his jacket on the floor for Mrs. Green to sit on. She was shaking. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she said softly. "The city was peaceful just yesterday." Ethan stayed quiet. He didn't know what to say. He could still hear explosions outside, each one louder than the last. Hours passed. The night felt endless. Ethan tried to rest, but every sound made him jump. At one point, the library door creaked open. Both of them froze. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Coming closer. Ethan quickly hid behind a bookshelf, motioning for Mrs. Green to stay silent. He peeked through the shelves and saw a shadow. Someone was inside. The man's boots were muddy, his uniform torn. He looked like a soldier, but his eyes were wild, desperate, not disciplined. He was holding a gun, shaking. Ethan's heart raced. The man walked straight to the counter, breathing hard. Then, without warning, he fell to his knees. He dropped the gun and began to sob. Mrs. Green stepped forward slowly. "Are you hurt?" she asked gently. The man didn't answer. He just whispered, "They're all gone, everyone." Ethan stayed hidden, watching. The man's voice was filled with pain, the kind that comes from losing everything. He looked up, tears running down his dirty face. "I didn't want this war. None of us did." Mrs. Green knelt beside him, offering water from her bag. Ethan could see her kindness even in this moment of chaos. For a brief second, the world went silent again. Then another explosion shook the ground. Lights flickered. The man looked up, fear returning to his eyes. "They're coming," he said. "You have to leave. Now." Mrs. Green looked at Ethan. "We can't go outside," she said. Ethan's mind raced. He remembered the basement under the library where the old books were kept. "Follow me," he said. "There's a place we can hide." They ran down the narrow stairs just as the front doors burst open. The sound of boots and shouting filled the air. Ethan pushed open the basement door and pulled Mrs. Green inside. They closed it quietly, breathing fast in the dark. Above them, chaos continued. But for now, they were safe, or at least, they hoped so. Ethan sat on the cold floor, clutching his father's book again. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know if the city would survive the night. But one thing was certain: his life would never be the same again. This was the beginning of something much bigger, something that would test his courage, his heart, and his hope. The unexpected war had begun. The basement was dark and cold. The smell of dust and old paper filled the air. Ethan sat on the floor beside Mrs. Green, listening to the noise above, footsteps, shouting, and the heavy sound of things breaking. Every noise made his heart beat faster. For hours, they didn't speak. The only light came from a small crack in the wall where moonlight slipped through. Ethan's hands were shaking, but he tried not to show it. Mrs. Green looked tired, her face pale and covered in sweat. "Are you all right?" he whispered. She nodded weakly. "Just tired. But we'll be fine. We have to stay quiet." Ethan leaned back against a stack of old boxes. He didn't feel fine. He was hungry, scared, and confused. The city above them, the city he had known all his life, was changing into something unrecognizable. He could still hear explosions in the distance, and sometimes, the sound of crying. As dawn arrived, silence fell again. The shooting stopped. The world above seemed frozen. Ethan decided to check outside. "I'll be careful," he told Mrs. Green. He pushed the basement door open and climbed up slowly. The library looked worse than before. The front door was broken, windows shattered, books scattered everywhere. But there were no soldiers. Only smoke and the faint smell of burning wood. Ethan stepped outside. The morning light revealed the destruction: streets full of debris, cars turned upside down, buildings half burned. It didn't look like his city anymore. It looked like a ghost town. He walked a few steps and saw something on the ground: a small, torn teddy bear. It made his heart ache. Someone must have dropped it while running. Someone small. Someone scared. Ethan bent down and picked it up. He brushed off the dust and whispered, "I hope you found your way home." But he knew not everyone did. He returned to the basement with a heavy heart. "It's bad out there," he said softly. "The streets are empty." Mrs. Green nodded. "We'll stay here until it's safe. Maybe the army will come." Days passed. They survived on canned food and bottled water they found in a storage room. Each day felt longer than the last. The silence became louder. Sometimes, Ethan would climb upstairs at night to look at the city from the library window. He could see the faint glow of fires in the distance. He wondered if anyone else had survived. He thought about his parents, about the accident that took them away, and how he had promised himself to never give up. But now, the world itself seemed to be giving up on him. One afternoon, while searching through the upper floors for supplies, Ethan heard something, a faint tapping sound. It came from the back door of the library. He froze. Then it came again, tap, tap, tap. Ethan walked slowly toward the sound, holding a metal rod for safety. When he opened the door, a small figure stumbled inside, a girl, no older than 12. Her clothes were dirty, and her face was streaked with tears. "Please," she whispered, "help me." Ethan quickly closed the door and led her inside. Mrs. Green rushed over. "What happened to you, dear?" she asked gently. The girl could barely speak. My brother, they took him. Soldiers. I ran. I don't know where to go." Mrs. Green hugged her tightly, whispering soft words of comfort. Ethan gave the girl some water and a small piece of bread. She ate silently, tears falling from her eyes. "Do you know your name?" Ethan asked softly. "Lila," she said. That night, the three of them sat together in the basement, three strangers connected by fear, loss, and hope. Days turned into weeks. The sounds of war came and went, but slowly the city began to quiet down. Food was running low, but somehow they managed. Ethan started to feel a sense of responsibility. He wasn't just surviving now, he was protecting. He would wake early, sneak outside to find water or canned food from abandoned shops, and come back before sunrise. Each time he left, Mrs. Green would worry. "You don't have to do this alone," she said. But Ethan only smiled. "You once told me books teach courage. I guess I'm learning it now." She smiled weakly, proud of the boy she once caught sleeping under her tables. One day, while searching near an old school, Ethan found something strange: a group of volunteers helping the wounded. They weren't soldiers. They were ordinary people, trying to rebuild what was lost. A man wearing a blue vest called out to him, "Hey. You okay, kid? Need help?" Ethan hesitated. He wanted to trust them, but fear held him back. "I have people with me," he said. "An old woman and a little girl. They need food." The man nodded and handed him a small box. "Take this. There's more at our camp, near the river. Come tomorrow. It's safe there." Ethan thanked him and ran back to the library. When he gave the food to Mrs. Green and Lila, he saw hope flicker in their eyes again. "Maybe," Mrs. Green whispered, "maybe it's time to leave this place." That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling and thought about what the man had said: a safe camp, near the river. But leaving meant saying goodbye to the only place that had protected them, the library. It wasn't just a building anymore. It was their shelter, their small world in the middle of chaos. Still, he knew they couldn't stay forever. He looked at Mrs. Green and Lila sleeping beside him. Then he looked at his father's book. On the first page were words his father once wrote. "Sometimes you must leave your safe place to find your true home." Ethan took a deep breath. He finally understood. Tomorrow, they would leave the library. Tomorrow, they would walk toward hope, even if it was far, even if it was dangerous. He didn't know what waited for them beyond the city. But he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't the same boy anymore. The war had taken everything from him. But it had also given him something new: purpose. The morning sun barely broke through the thick clouds. Smoke from distant fires turned the sky gray, but Ethan didn't hesitate. He packed the little bag he had prepared the night before, making sure Mrs. Green and Lila were ready. Every movement felt heavy, as if the air itself weighed down on them. "Are we ready?" Ethan asked softly. Lila nodded, clutching the teddy bear he had found weeks ago. Mrs. Green adjusted her shawl and took a deep breath. "Let's go," she whispered. They stepped out of the library cautiously. The streets were empty, but the silence was louder than the war itself. Broken glass crunched under their shoes. Smoke curled from half-burned buildings, and every shadow seemed alive, moving as if waiting to trap them. Ethan led the way, keeping a careful eye on the horizon. Every corner, every alley could hide danger. Soldiers, looters, or wild animals, anything could appear. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing on his young shoulders. Lila held his hand tightly, and he could feel her fear through her small fingers. As they walked, Ethan remembered the volunteers he had seen near the school. They had said there was a safe camp near the river. It felt like a long journey through streets littered with abandoned cars and piles of rubble. Occasionally, a building would collapse, sending clouds of dust into the air. Hours passed. The city seemed endless. Each step forward was slow and careful. Ethan found himself scanning rooftops, listening for voices, trying to imagine what could be hiding in the shadows. Lila trailed behind, her small voice whispering questions he didn't always answer. "Ethan, do you think they'll catch us?" she asked. He shook his head. "No. We just have to be careful and stay together." Mrs. Green walked silently beside them. Her hands were worn, her back a little bent, but her presence gave them courage. She didn't speak much, but every glance she gave Ethan was full of trust that he would lead them safely. By midday, they reached a square that had once been bustling with life. Now it was filled with overturned cars, smoke rising from burned shops, and the faint sound of distant cries. Lila froze. I don't want to go," she said, her voice trembling. Ethan knelt down beside her. "I know it's scary. But staying here is worse. We have to keep moving. We'll find people who can help us." Lila nodded reluctantly and took his hand. Mrs. Green placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Together, they moved forward. As they navigated the ruins, they heard a sudden shout behind them. They froze. "Stop," a voice yelled. 3 men emerged from the shadows. They wore torn uniforms and carried sticks and old guns. Ethan's heart raced. He pulled Lila close, moving himself in front of her and Mrs. Green. The tallest man stepped forward. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. Ethan swallowed hard. We are just trying to survive," he said. His voice was steady, even though his hands shook. The men looked at each other, muttering. For a moment, Ethan thought they were going to attack. But then the tallest man laughed, a dry, bitter laugh. "Survive," he said. "This city doesn't care if you survive. Take what you can, and move fast." Without another word, the men vanished into the shadows, leaving only silence. Ethan exhaled slowly. His legs trembled, but he didn't show it. The rest of the day was a slow journey through broken streets and abandoned buildings. Ethan kept them moving, stopping only when it was dark enough to hide. They slept in basements, empty shops, and once under a collapsed roof. Every night, Ethan thought about his father's words. "Courage is not the absence of fear, it's moving forward even when fear is all around you." He repeated the words silently, drawing strength from them. On the 3rd day, they finally reached the outskirts of the city. Smoke was thinner here, and the streets were quieter. Ethan spotted the river in the distance, the same river the volunteers had mentioned. He felt hope stirring in his chest for the first time in days. "There it is," he whispered. Lila ran ahead slightly, her eyes wide with excitement. Mrs. Green smiled softly, a tear rolling down her cheek. But even as relief filled them, Ethan stayed alert. The journey wasn't over. Danger could still be anywhere, and the war was not finished with the city yet. They continued walking, careful and silent, shadows moving with them as the sun began to set. The river was close now, and with it, the promise of safety and help. Ethan glanced at Lila and Mrs. Green. He realized something important: he wasn't just surviving anymore. He was leading, protecting, and guiding them through darkness. He was no longer just a scared boy, he was becoming someone who could make a difference. And as the first lights of the river camp appeared, Ethan felt a spark of hope that he hadn't felt in a long time. Even in a city destroyed by war, even in the shadows of fear, there could still be light. Tomorrow, they would reach the camp. Tomorrow, their lives might change forever. But tonight they survived. And survival, Ethan realized, was only the first step. The river sparkled faintly under the evening sky, its waters calm and steady, a stark contrast to the chaos Ethan had left behind in the city. The camp lay on its banks, a collection of tents, small huts, and makeshift shelters. Smoke curled from small fires where people were cooking. Children ran between the tents, laughing, while adults carried food and supplies. Ethan stopped for a moment, letting the sight sink in. For the first time in days, he felt a strange warmth, not just from the fires, but from hope itself. Is this real? Lila asked softly, her small hands gripping his. Yes, Ethan said with a smile. We're safe here. Mrs. Green let out a sigh she didn't realize she had been holding. I can't believe it, a place where people are alive, not just surviving. They walked carefully into the camp. Volunteers in blue vests noticed them immediately. One of them, a tall man with kind eyes, came forward. You made it, he said, smiling. You're safe now. Come, we'll give you food and a place to rest. Ethan led Mrs. Green and Lila to a small tent where they could stay. The volunteers offered them warm food, a luxury after days of cold bread and water. For the first time, Ethan ate without fear, savoring each bite. Lila devoured her food quickly, her eyes bright with relief. As they ate, Ethan noticed other children like Lila, some with torn clothes, some with wide, scared eyes. Others laughed and played, but he could see the shadow of the city still in their hearts. He realized they were all survivors, carrying the same heavy weight he had been carrying. After dinner, the camp leader gathered everyone near a fire. Children sat on the ground while adults stood around. He spoke gently, yet with authority. This camp is for those who have lost everything, he said. Here, we will rebuild our lives together. We will learn, work, and care for each other. The war may have taken much from us, but it cannot take our spirit. Ethan listened closely. His heart swelled with a new determination. For so long, he had just survived. But now, he wanted more, to protect, to help, to make a difference for people like Lila and the others. The next morning, the camp was alive with activity. Ethan helped Mrs. Green and Lila unpack their small tent. Then he joined a group clearing debris near the riverbank. Every small action felt meaningful. Every smile he received in return felt like sunlight after a long winter. While working, Ethan met other teenagers who had survived the war. Some had lost parents, some had lost siblings, some had lost homes entirely. But each one carried a quiet strength, a determination to live. They shared stories, food, and laughter, small acts that slowly stitched the torn pieces of their hearts back together. Lila made friends immediately, running and playing by the river under Mrs. Green's watchful eyes. Ethan smiled as he watched her, the same fear in her eyes that had followed her through the city slowly disappearing. Yet, even in the safety of the camp, danger lingered in memory. Ethan couldn't forget the shadows of the city, the soldiers, the broken streets, the cries of the lost. But for the first time, he realized he had a choice. He could stay scared, or he could turn his fear into courage. He started helping other children with basic reading and writing. Mrs. Green, though old and weak, taught in a small tent that served as a school. Together, they became a team, Ethan protecting, Mrs. Green teaching, and Lila inspiring others with her laughter. Ethan's days became a rhythm of work and care. Every time he helped someone, he felt the weight on his shoulders lighten. Every smile he received reminded him that the world was not completely lost. Weeks passed, and the camp began to grow. New tents appeared, small gardens were planted, and children who had been silent started to speak, play, and dream. Ethan realized something important: safety was not just a place. It was people helping each other. It was kindness and courage shared in the smallest ways. One evening, as Ethan sat by the river, watching the sun set over the water, he thought of the library he had left behind. The place where he had hidden from fear, where Mrs. Green had first given him hope, and where he had promised to come back one day. He knew then that this camp was temporary. One day, they would all leave stronger, braver, and ready to face the world again. But for now, the camp was a sanctuary. And for the first time since the war began, Ethan allowed himself to believe that the future could be bright. Night fell. The camp grew quiet, the fires dimmed, and the children slept peacefully in their tents. Ethan, Mrs. Green, and Lila sat together under the stars, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the remaining fire. Ethan whispered, "We survived the worst, but this is just the beginning." Mrs. Green smiled and held his hand. "Yes, Ethan. And you'll see one day, your courage will light the way for many others." Lila leaned against him, her eyes heavy with sleep. "I'm not afraid anymore," she murmured. Ethan nodded. He felt the truth in her words. The war had taken so much from them. But it had also given them something else, a chance to start again. And in that small, quiet camp by the river, Ethan understood the first lesson of life after chaos. Even after the darkest nights, hope always finds a way. Years had passed since the river camp. The war was over, but the scars it left on the city, and on the people who survived, would remain forever. Ethan, now in his early 20s, had changed. The boy who once ran through broken streets with fear in his eyes had grown into a young man of determination and purpose. He had worked hard, first in small jobs, then at a software company. Every paycheck, every project, every late night reminded him of the promise he had made to himself in the library so many years ago: "I will come back. I will make a difference." Ethan had never forgotten the library. Its quiet corners, the smell of old books, the warmth of Mrs. Green's kindness, they had been his sanctuary in the darkest times. Even when he slept under harsh city lights or scavenged for food, the memory of the library stayed with him, guiding him, comforting him, and inspiring him. One crisp morning, Ethan returned to the city. The streets were different now, slowly being rebuilt, with workers clearing rubble and children playing in small parks. Yet, as he approached the library, he noticed the scars of the past: shattered windows still boarded up, walls marked by soot, and broken shelves that had never been replaced. He paused at the entrance. The library looked smaller now than he remembered, yet it was powerful in his mind, a symbol of hope, a reminder of what had saved him when he had nowhere else to turn. Ethan stepped inside. Dust hung in the air, and sunlight filtered through broken panes, illuminating the empty hallways. He walked carefully to the corner where he once slept, now covered with debris. He touched the wooden floor gently. It had been years, but he could still feel the echo of fear, the faint smell of old books, and the quiet warmth of hope. Then he saw her, Mrs. Green, now older and frilier, but still full of the kindness that had guided him years ago. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice trembling. He smiled. "It's me, Mrs. Green. I kept my promise." Tears filled her eyes. You came back." Ethan nodded. "I did. And I wanted to do something for the library, for the place that saved me." From his bag, he took a folded letter and placed it on the counter. Mrs. Green opened it carefully. Inside was a check enough to rebuild the entire library, to modernize it, and to create programs for children who, like him, had no safe place to learn or dream. This is incredible," she whispered. Ethan shook his head. "No, Mrs. Green. It's not me. It's what the library gave me. It gave me hope, courage, and the chance to grow. Now, it can do the same for hundreds of other kids." The work began immediately. Volunteers repaired the broken windows, cleaned the dust-covered shelves, and painted the walls. Books that had been damaged were replaced, and new ones were donated. The library slowly came back to life, brighter and warmer than ever. Ethan stayed every day, helping organize, teaching children, and guiding volunteers. Lila, now a teenager, often joined him, smiling and laughing among the other children. Mrs. Green watched, her heart full of pride. The library had transformed from a place of survival into a place of growth, learning, and dreams. And for Ethan, it was the fulfillment of a promise he had made to himself as a frightened boy. On the day of the reopening, the library was filled with children, families, and neighbors. A small ceremony was held, and Ethan stood in front of everyone, feeling the weight of the journey he had traveled. "I was once a boy who had nowhere to go," he said, his voice calm but firm. "This library saved me. And now, it can save many others. We all need hope, and we all deserve a place to dream." The crowd applauded. Mrs. Green wiped tears from her eyes as she whispered, "You've made it real, Ethan. You've made it real." He walked to the same corner where he had once hidden, now clean and safe. He placed his hand on the wooden floor and whispered, "Thank you, for saving me, for letting me grow." For the first time, Ethan felt complete. The library, the place that had been his refuge, had now become his gift to the world. Years later, Ethan would look back on his life, the streets, the war, the river camp, and realize that every hardship had led him here. He had been given a chance to survive, to learn, and to return what he had received. The homeless teen who slept in the shadows of the library had grown into the young man who brought light to hundreds of other children. The promise he made to himself had been fulfilled. And the library, once quiet and empty, now echoed with laughter, learning, and hope. Ethan smiled. He knew this was only the beginning. The boy had returned, and he had changed the world, one book, one child, one act of kindness at a time.